what my goal is here is, I think a lot of people have heard that there's DoD funding, but it's like this mysterious sort of area that you don't know much about, and you certainly don't know who to ask. And it's very unclear for a lot of people, how would you go about actually getting funded by the DoD, and what does that mean, and what are your obligations, and who are you helping? So this is what I'm trying to do, is to give you a sort of a broad overview of what funding is available, what is the nature of the funding mechanisms, and what is the expectation of biostatistical input in doing these. So there's a bit of a skew. I am a physician by training, so I've been doing DoD, I'm working as an SRO, which is a scientific review officer. In the NIH, SROs are full-time employees. They're given a contract, they are hired, they work for the NIH. For the company that I subcontract to, it's just that. The DoD will let a program, and they will contact me and say, do you want to manage this program? And that management requires identifying the panelists, monitoring their progress during the pre-meeting aspects of the program, so looking at every single critique they write, and if they elect to not write their critiques in a timely manner, trying to encourage them to be a little bit more forthcoming, which can be very complicated. You know, if you want to work with really smart, busy people, they are really smart and busy, and so you have to sort of walk a delicate balance. And then managing the on-site, which has to be respectful and collegial. It should be a little bit fun. We go out and drink if there's enough time in the evening. But to extract from those domain experts everything that they know. And my give back is, one, I try to be passionate about what I'm doing, is that these are important objectives to help people receive better care, to optimize the clinical paradigms. The other passion is, I think that people, and you'll hear this in my talk, and it's one of the last slides, is I encourage people to participate in peer review, because you understand what will be done if you submit an application. And you get an inside track to what are the metrics for review, and what are the places where people fall down. You can look at this in the future and go, I know this is a tricky area, I'm going to write this really carefully, I'm going to have my peers read it, and I'm going to have a better shot at funding. So I encourage anybody who gets offered an option to participate in a peer review to do it. It's a labor of love. There's like very little compensation, but you do learn a lot, and you engage in a community that is often very supportive. So the first disclaimer, so that everybody is aware, I am not an employee of the DoD. And while I speak passionately about the opportunity to get funded, I am not necessarily sanctioned by the DoD. They know I'm here, but that's as close as it gets to so I am not necessarily saying something that everybody would say in the same way. So this is the start of it. So getting funding in 2017 is hard. I think, you know, the representation in the room is suggestive that you all would like to up your hit rate. I think everybody wants to do that. I think as we're looking ahead, we're sitting now looking at a continuing resolution. That's April 28 is when that will either be resolved or left to be unresolved. All funding is gonna follow on from that. So I think in the future, though, the thought is that they're going to pull back 20% from all funding agencies, is what they're saying in the current budget. I don't know how that'll be executed, but that is the thought. So it'll be harder to get money. The DMRDP, which is the Defense Medical Research Program, is the side of the DoD funding that is more oriented toward combat casualty. They are continuing to fund that limb more successfully than they seem to be allocating to the CDMRP, the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. I'm going to go into that a bit more in depth. The CDMRP is a much older program. It started in the 90s, and it's the one that covers civilian cancer, essentially, and all the medical diseases. It is not at all related to combat care, and they really are agnostic as to people whether they're in the military or not. So the CDMRP are earmarks out of Congress. They're not defense dollars. The biggest difference also between this and other programs is these programs escrow upfront, so that if the government shuts down, these funds continue to flow to the people that have been funded. NIH can turn off their funding if they don't get each year. And they'll just call you up and say, sorry, you're out of luck, we have no more money, you have to shut down your trials. These programs actually escrow up front because they're not sure that they'll get continuing funding. So if the program doesn't get funded that next year, they have to already have set it aside. So it's a really big difference. You know, once you win an award, you will be funded throughout. This program also doesn't have a pay line. The NIH does. And what that means is there's no formal assessment that if you fall to a certain rating level, you can't be funded. The DoD is looking for solutions to problems. And if you submit something that meets an unmet need, they may actually tell you, we know you have some weaknesses, but they've been recognized by everybody that reviewed it as remediable. And so that's an important part of what we do in our review programs, is to say, is this fixable, or is this just, we can't help you? Because they can go back and renegotiate the contracts with people and say, we understand this is a problem, but you can fix it. And if you're willing to fix it, we're willing to fund you. So they can dip below what might have been otherwise an unfundable project because it meets a well-met need. And that gap is something that they really want to pursue, and they will help you improve your product. They don't do it always, but they reserve the right. So we'll go into this a little bit, but as a rule, the DoD funds research that's earlier than what the NIH sees. So a lot of people that have DoD funding go on to the NIH. A lot of people that have NIH don't necessarily go back to the DoD, but these are troubled times. And I think that there's going to be people going in all directions. But there's a lot of funding that's earlier, higher risk, because they're willing to take on that risk at the DoD. They seem to tolerate it better than the NIH. The final point that I think is important, and I think it's why it's important for biostatisticians, the first clinical program that the DoD ran, fortunately or unfortunately, I ran for them. And that was in 2007. And that was a trial for everybody who's involved. I was naive, they were naive, and the reviewers kind of got abused. We reviewed 62 clinical trial protocols in 2.5 days. And it was very painful across 3 disease entities. And the biostatisticians to this day will not talk to me. They said, never again. But more and more programs are reaching that transitional threshold. So they've seeded funding in the preclinical era, and now they're reaping the benefits. And so more and more programs are going to move into clinical trials. So there's going to be more allocation for that. History. So this is where I started. So people say to me, I don't understand this. The DoD, isn't that all like VA and warriors and military personnel? And the answer is no. The DoD funding is a throwback to the way this was originally set up as an execution phenomenon, not as a target audience for this. The people that are benefiting are not necessarily military personnel. So in the 1990s, a group of women, either as breast cancer survivors, patients, or their families, lobbied Congress. And they said, the NIH program is too little too late. Women are dying. You need to do more. You need to do more higher risk research because we want to get better care earlier on. And people in Congress said, that's really sort of an interesting concept. So they said, okay, fine. We're going to give you money. They said, we have $100 million that we can give you. They keep changing the number. Now it's up to 210, but originally it was 90, and now, I don't know, they've done magic. These are DoD slides, but they've done some magic to it. But so they allocated this money, in a sense, they said, okay, what do we do with it? Who do we give this money to? Who is actually going to execute on this first breast cancer research program? So they went to the Institutes of Medicine and they said, listen, if you wanted to do a study on how from the ground up would you develop a research program for us so that we know what to do with the money, and the IOM figured it out for them. They said, you know, you're going to set it up through the Defense Department. They're going to do all of the management. They're going to do it as a 2-tier process. It's going to be one group to do vision setting, You're going to have another group do the merit. Then that same vision setting group is going to do funding. And so it's going to keep going in these iterative loops. And they work the whole thing out. And since then, the congressionally directed medical research program is all the result of people lobbying Congress. So these are all earmarks. It's not a word you'll hear from many people, but that's what they are. It does not come out of the defense budget. It is all taxpayer dollars. This is their funding history. So at its inception, this was the breast cancer, and you can see it's grown, and all the little pieces of those are different slices divvied up into different programs. So it has been on a pretty good tick. How we're going to go next year, I can't even figure out. So this was last year's. Again, this is a DoD slide. I told them I was doing this, and they said, okay, just take off the DoD attribution. But this was the allocations for last year. So it's a broad-based program. The biggest jump is on the peer-reviewed medical research program. I have a thing on here. This guy. So you can see by this number. So that's a program made up of, last year was 39. The topic areas are different medical entities. And it is the fastest growing program inside of the CDMRP. And I'll talk about it because they run one program called the Focus Program, which is sort of modeled after the Dream Team projects. It's a 5-year, $10 million award. And it's something everybody should know about. And it's an entity that very few organizations have the capacity to offer. So this is, I touched on it. You can look through these. This is why the DoD is unique. It is not, there are no standing programs. Everything has to be re-upped on an annual basis, which is very unique. And it means that every year they can look at gaps in the medical need and reassess where they are and what they want to do. So the vision setting is done annually. They say they try to avoid duplication. There's clearly some duplicity, but it's hard to do that. They try and do it by staying earlier in the funding cycle so that people are doing higher risk work. But as we're crossing that translational threshold, clinical trials are clinical trials. But they're trying to meet different needs. As I mentioned, the funds are obligated. There's no continuation funding. There's no extension funding. So if you don't make it, you don't make it. They do reserve the right to pull funding on clinical trials if you miss your deadlines and your milestones. Continuing resolution, I don't know. This program cycles. They like to call it the research Krebs cycle when you hear them at peer review and they give this little talk, and I always laugh. But basically, this is the place where they set the vision, and the peer review happens inside of this. And after it's passed off from peer review, it goes to the original vision setting committee. They do negotiate, and then this. So it's actually a 2-ish year. These are long cycles. These don't happen quickly. So you have to sort of anticipate that once you get into it. It does take some time. So this is sort of a recapitulation, but it's spelled out a little bit more fully. These are the current programs. This is what I think is going to be in FY17. But what they're putting out there, if you go to, I didn't put the website up there, but it's CDMRP. I think it's .gov now. It used to be a .mil. They have all the current programs. The program announcements are posted, and they all have a caveat saying we're releasing this without promise of funding in case you want to start to prepare, but they're not promising which programs are going to go forward because they don't know it yet. So they've expanded broadly over the years. This is, in the space of 20 years from just breast cancer start. So when you think about this is also too much to take in. I just wanted everybody to understand that these exist. The mechanisms that are offered are exceedingly broad. And when people are asking me today, like, can I get in there as a statistician and do independent statistics research? The answer is maybe. They support, broad academic backgrounds. They are looking for problem solving. There are epidemiology research programs. They are looking for young professionals to get in the game, get yourself exposed, do something. So you can see some of these don't even require data to come in. They're totally exploratory. They're trying to generate novel ideas. They're trying to get people launched. They do investigator initiated. They do every kind of possible thing. These breakthrough awards, they have a varying funding level depending on, it's duplicitous, that wasn't well written. But they're looking to really sponsor research. The Era of Hope, I think, only applies to breast cancer. But you can see they just keep twisting these around in different ways to encourage people to look at this. And I have to say, so few people apply for some of these awards that it's astonishing. You'll get 8, 10, 10 applications you're reviewing, you go like, where did we miss the mark on not getting the word out? So this is the one I was talking about, this focus program. We've been doing them, I think, 3 years now. I don't know if there's an NIH equivalent, but these are the biggest award that are offered. They are designed to be broad, interdisciplinary ways to address a problem. So one of the programs that I've worked on now for many years is looking at developing bone regenerative approaches for combat casualty care, which will also provide solutions for trauma and for cancer. But the primary goal is in wounded warriors. They look at it from the level of maxillomandible injuries, which are one of the areas that are very at risk because it's unprotected. And with IEDs, a lot of people take injuries, and replacing this bone appeals to people because it gives you the cosmetic appearance in public. You can eat, you can speak. So that's very good. And then also long bones. So you don't have to foreshorten lower extremities because those are very problematic. It's a huge problem, but there are about, of the 39 topic areas in the peer-reviewed medical program, they bring about 15 forward as an option for the focus program. And they usually offer 2 to 3 a year, so they're highly selective. And I have to say, most of the awards I've read are not well written, so people don't take them seriously, which is sort of a shame for all that money. So these are some of the, you can see that these just kind of go on and on. This one we've had, I think, 4. And once they've solved it, they don't necessarily have to circle their wagons, but they have a lung cancer one. I believe they have an ovarian cancer one. And I think there's 1 or 2 others. What they're trying to do with those, and it's very difficult, is to make them self-supporting. And it's extremely difficult to get these biorepositories able to maintain themselves with some sort of a revenue trail. You can see as we're working our way through, we're getting into the clinical stuff. The pilot awards are sort of interesting. The DoD, notwithstanding pushback, doesn't seem to totally understand what a pilot award is. And the last time I ran a pilot award, we had some things that were like phase 2. And I kept telling the DoD, these are not pilot awards. And they would go, just review them. So they're a little loose on some of these areas. The consortiums are interesting also. They are interested in supporting collegiality across institutions. And this is the other side of the fence. So those were all CDMRP, so the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. These are the defense medical research, the R&D, the research and development programs. So they run by what they're called JPCs. So the JPCs are actually the military committees that come together to do the assessment of need and gap analysis. So the other programs are run by what they call them their vernacular integration panels, which are all domain experts. These actually, a lot of them are actually full-fledged senior military career personnel. And these are broken down, so the MedSim and informatics, I was telling some of the faculty today, this is the one that's looking at medical modeling and information science. I've run 3 or 4 of those programs in the past 18 months. They're moving into looking at electronic health records. They're very interested in simulation training education. So they're looking at VR and AR, ways to actually take advantage of what technology offers today for training purposes. So anybody's interested in education, online education, any of those attributes, they're seriously looking at this stuff. They're also looking at ways to get data from in-theater that's acquired through speech and video, extrapolate how to get the data out or extract the data out of it, put it into an electronic medical record that will then follow as care is provided further in upper echelons. The military infectious diseases is mostly focused on looking at vaccination projects. They are probably one of the largest supporters for malaria, still extant in the government, but they are looking at other entities as they rear their head. The military operational medicine program is actually focused more on military resilience and preparedness. So this is a preventive entity. They are trying to not be reactive. So they're looking at ways to anticipate what might be difficult about being in the military, not just in theater, but just the separation aspects also. So they're looking at increasing and enhancing resilience for families before people are actually deployed. So those are really interesting. There's a lot of preventive medicine in those as well. So again, for epidemiology and for public health, enormous opportunities in that. The combat casualty care program is actually the in-theater care. So they're looking at what happens in the acute care needs for...
In theater, what do you mean?
On the ground, down and dirty, grungy, combat level, in theater. That's what it's called. So the grungy stuff. So the guys, in uniform with their, with their guns, with their ammo, getting hurt. So it is the acute care that they're receiving, and then it's also the transitional care. So it's called en route care. So each time they're handed off. So this is one of the programs that also looks at how do we decrease the error associated with communications problems. How do you prevent, somebody from having, an X problem becomes Y problem because of whatever the communications errors are. So they're looking at eradicating that. The radiation health effects is pretty much what it is. They're looking at ways to anticipate and to stockpile response for radiation. The clinical and rehab program somewhat maps to the orthopedics program, and they tend to run them at the same time, and you're vying for the same people. So the orthotics programs fit into there, the prosthetics programs fit into there, some of the pain management programs fit into there. But these programs are different from the CDMRP. The primary target for these is wounded warriors and their families, so beneficiaries. But these are very differently targeted, and the expectation set is that these will benefit them dramatically, with the windfall being to civilians. And it's also expected, not mandatory, but expected that you'll be working with that population as not just your target, but your sample. This is because I thought about it, and I thought there's going to be different people in this room, and they are not going to all be clinical trialists, which is mostly where I hang my hat. And I think it's very important because I think that there's room for the biostatisticians to get involved and engage in numerous levels of these DoD funding opportunities. And I think that, I don't know if you can, kind of go out and sing and dance, but I think that the more interplay there is between the people that initiate the studies to understand how much they need you and how important biostatistics is to getting funding will do everybody service. So I added this last night because I was thinking to myself, clinical trial, it's very different across the different funding agencies. when the DoD first started, they didn't define a clinical trial. When they first started doing in the clinical trial research. And we found that we were getting applications and didn't know what to do with them. So they determined that they only wanted to do interventional trials when it came to clinical trials. So that is prospective, so we don't want retrospective data analysis as part of a clinical trial, and we don't want observational trials. There should be an intervention, and there should be a measurable outcome. It's not absolutely consistent. The DoD is interesting. There are these silos across the different programs, and the program managers don't all talk to each other, and they don't also share the program announcements. So that there is inconsistency, for which I feel apologetic, but I don't write them. I offer to rewrite them, but they don't usually want to hear that from me. So it is important to understand this. Some programs, as part of the translational program, may allow for data collection on a retrospective basis, and that may be the future basis. Same thing for a pilot trial, because you're doing data acquisition to develop the statistical basis for a phase 1 trial. They vary a little bit. So I thought this is sort of an important thing to look at. What is it that the DoD thinks you should give them as far as the specifics when you're applying to get funding for a clinical trial? And I know you may all be clinical trialists. I'm going to try and veer off, but at least to understand for the people that do want to get involved in that, these are the features that they are saying we need to know about. And if you don't address them, it's a problem, and it will show up in your merit scores. So this is what they're willing to fund. So new products, they can be pharma, they can be device, they can be clinical guidance. So we've had applications where people actually want to change the clinical guidance and what's considered standard of care. And they want to rewrite those. And those are sort of interesting. They're different. And then emerging stuff, they're very interested, much more than the NIH, in new therapeutics, new diagnostics, new imaging, all those sorts of things. They will outline in each program announcement, and you have to look very carefully. You can't just do these randomly. They have to fit into what is considered an unmet need. If you don't hit that in a given year, it's not going to be reviewed. They are fairly specific. In most of them, they will tell you it should be responsive to military need. They'll all say that somewhere. Some are more than others, but it will come up. Availability of the intervention. So if you're working with a pharmaceutical, you have to document that you can actually have it in-house. A lot of the studies that are coming forward now are repurposing pharma when they're finding out that this has an unexpected clinical effect, and we want to study it specifically to see if that's real. So they don't have to require FDA approval if they're already approved. But if it isn't approved, you have to document that you will be able to get your clinical approval within 6 months of funding. And you have to put that into your proposal, because they found that people that didn't do it left them holding this money for more time than they wanted to. They want these to be up and running. So they kind of cut off at phase 2. They generally give lip service that they'll fund through larger scale trials, but they don't necessarily say phase 2. I don't think the DoD technically understands how expensive a phase 3 trial is to run. So they just assume.
Neither do the people submitting them.
Right.
Some of their budgets have been.
Right, they're
zero.
crazy. So they just assume they can do everything, but it's not the case. I mean, if you follow all the Tufts studies, the cost of running a phase 3 trial, it's prohibitive on the budget that they're going to offer you. Clinical trials require preliminary data. You don't always get it, but it is a required. This was the piece about the FDA. They have to be able to be up and running. Almost nobody gives communications plans. They just assume everybody can communicate. They don't tell you whether they're going to be using specific transfer protocols. They don't stipulate anything about security of information. They tell you how they blind and how they randomize, but they don't understand that there have to be security protocols. They don't discuss shipping anything from here to there. I mean, people just ignore some of the hardcore facts of multi-institutional trials, which are going to become more and more important, I think, as funding gets cut back and you're going to need to reach out to more organizations to achieve your recruitment goals. So the data management, data safety, clinical monitoring, are big deals for trials. Transitions plan, people pay lip service to it. The DoD has looked back over the years and said, we want to get bang for our buck. If we're going to fund you, we want to know that you can take this to the next step if you're successful. If you're not successful, God bless. But if you are, the ball doesn't stop rolling. So I don't know how many people follow DARPA funding. The majority of funds that go into DARPA die when they've proved their principle. They do not know how to roll them forward into efforts that actually go out into any use. Most of the 9/11 funding has come to no avail. They don't know how to manage it. So the DoD says, fine, we want you to provide a plan stipulating future funding, what you're going to do about intellectual property, how you're going to get partners, and how you're going to actually move this forward as if it were a business plan, and almost nobody does it. It is a key part of DoD funding. And every university has a transition office. Everybody does it. They all have intellectual property folk. Call them up and say, we need you to look this over and give us your best shot. Not complicated. Okay, who can get money? Basically, it's not that complicated. The funding, they have 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, and the FPAs, the focus programs, go out to 5. They don't care who they fund. It is problematic for a lot of the reviewers. They say, why are you giving money to pharma? Why are you giving money to private companies? Why isn't this all academic and institutionally oriented? And the answer is, they want the problem solved. They don't care. They'll fund people outside of the US. This is not a US-based program. They fund anybody, anywhere. People apply from all over the world, and people apply from private companies, especially now that large pharma doesn't want to adopt the risk of phase 1 and phase 2 trials. After phase 2, where your risk returns crisscross, and you're going to have less risk and more return, they'll pick them up. But those phase 1 and phase 2 trials are risk loaded, and they don't want them. So they come to the DoD and they say, will you fund this? If they have a good idea and they have an appropriate way to execute, they will absolutely go with that. So the funding is shifting. The funding is funny now. When I first started this, they would give you a not to exceed total cost. They'd say, the maximum we'll offer is $4 million. There's a couple programs now that say, we're not stipulating what our maximum cost is. Offer us a budget, and we'll see if we'll fund you. It's a very unusual approach to funding, but more and more of them are adopting it. I'm sure, as you're aware, when there's a limit set, people can get right up to a penny short of the ceiling being offered. I've never understood how they do it. It's remarkable. You're offering $900 and they're to the penny. It's like, how'd you do that? Anyway, so I think that's why they're moving into this, like, prove what you need, not what we're offering as the basis for moving forward. I didn't do that. Okay, so this is the review side. So this is how we assess whether you'll get funded. And it's equally important to understanding what the DoD thinks they want is how we're looking at merit. So and these are usually in what they consider high to low as far as importance. Some consider them equivalent. It varies from program to program. Where they're considered of equal value, it makes it hard for people to assess. So clinical impact. It's a very complicated decision to sort of look at that. In a clinical trial, you almost look at it and go, like, if it works, it would help, clearly. I mean, why would they be doing this? But then you have to start to look at what is the unmet need that they're addressing, and what is the critical medical need that they're addressing. Is there something else out there that already does that well, and do we need another? Is it an improvement? And they really, really, really want to understand what are the short-term gains versus the long-term gains. In clinical trial research, some of these guys go out 6 months, some of them go out 1 year, some consider a 2-year follow-up. you don't know the durability of most of the impact of these trials. So it's very difficult to extract information about the long-term benefit when you may lose it all. And so you have to be really skeptical on some of these, that they're going to do anything long-term, like for brain damage, for traumatic injuries, even some of the vaccines. We don't have the data sets coming in yet. So you have to be very skeptical. Military benefit, I didn't put anything under it. Sometimes they leave it to the committee to think about what might be of benefit, and sometimes you just leave it to the JPCs, who are actually in a better position to assess, will this be of any military value? Some of the military programs, you look at them and you go, I don't perceive any military benefit here, but God bless. I mean, it may be civilian, but it's not specifically military. Research strategy is a really important place to look at what are the benefits of having a biostatistician involved. Because a lot of the people that write these protocols have a really hard time parsing out what it is they want to do, how they want to do it, methodologically how they're going to achieve it. There's a lot of magic that occurs for some people in clinical medicine, and things just kind of happen, but you have to tease it out, and you have to educate. I was telling some of the students today, you have to educate the investigators that you work with about how do you design a trial to get the information you need, and you have to do it stepwise. You have to be very specific on your inclusion and exclusions. People offer you them, almost nobody gives you the rationales. It is requested that you provide a rationale, like why are you stopping at age 60? Why are you stopping at age 65? Most of the time you can legitimately understand that you're starting at 18. A lot of people will question you if you're moving to young adults because you have to use an assent, not just a consent, which gets more complicated. But if you need more people, some people do that. But you have to be, you have to specify why you're cutting off population, especially in today's world. Cutting things off at 55 or 65 doesn't make sense, and you can get a broader age group. But if you're trying to do a military relevance program, and you've got all 24-year-olds running around in the field, and then you're adding 55-year-olds to say that's an equivalent sample, it's like, no. I understand it gives you a broader opportunity set, but it's irrelevant. So you have to be, thoughtful. Endpoints. They have to be clinically relevant. It's almost never discussed in the program. Stacy isn't shaking her head, she's being very good. Sometimes you look at these endpoints and go, but why? It doesn't, it doesn't matter. And it's not going to change the way medicine is practiced today. So you have to do something that's actually going to make people adopt what you're doing, because it's going to actually change the way you impact patients' lives. And you don't want 1,000 endpoints. You want a clear endpoint, and you want to understand that you're measuring something that's clinically relevant and that will change the way people practice. They will actually adopt what you find. Validation on most of the instruments, people actually do well. Statistics plan. This is what they ask for in the protocols. When they put out the program announcement, this is what they ask for. I always ask for more, but this is specifically what is asked for. They want to know if the modeling and the analysis are appropriate and suitable. They want verification for the sample size and power. It almost always sort of happens. I ask for managing missing data. That's not necessarily asked for. I stuck that one in. Intervention, as I mentioned, has to be available. They want support for it being safe, and they want to understand that from a compliance and regulatory vantage point, it's all going to work out. Recruitment, nobody understands recruitment in almost any clinical trial. People always say, I did it before, I can do it again. They don't understand that the populations get fatigued, that there's competition for some of these populations. They don't document in their historical data set how many patients they actually see that have that problem. They'll tell you, we do 1,400 shoulder surgeries a year. Therefore, we can tell you that for this, specific shoulder problem, we'll be fine. But they don't tell you how many of that particular problem per year, and then make a best guess of how many would be willing to participate in a trial. You almost never get it. So needless to say, it's not unusual for trials to fail because they do not recruit fully.
It's not unusual for them to fail in the review because they don't address it.
No, in real world.
Yeah, but even in the review.
In the
we spend a
review,
lot of time on that.
people look at it and go, they can't possibly do this. So it's a problem. So feasibility and the historical case-based data is really important. So the specialists, I think I put the specialists later. Anyway, when we first started doing this, the question came up of who do you want on a clinical trial panel review? So it became domain experts, and then we had to figure out what else besides the domain experts. And it cleaned out to be a clinical trial biostatistician, a clinical trial bioethicist, and a technology transfer person. And then we also have the consumer reviewers. So the bioethicists are asked to look at this. One of the ways the DoD is squeezing money out of the review process is they're starting to trim the number of specialists we're allowed. So I've become a bioethicist in my new life. I am maybe being pushed to learn more and more about biostatistics because they keep trying to cut back on what they're willing to pay for. But these are very important issues. And again, as I was saying to the students, some of the issues that come up as ethical questions, the general population doesn't understand. Clinical equipoise is something that we look at. Basically what it means is you will not test something that you know before you go into the clinical trial is less good than what is currently clinically available. So that when people know something is not as good, it's not valid to put it into a trial. And it can't be one of your arms. It's just not allowed. And very few grown-ups that have diseases understand that. And that's why very few clinical trials populate as easily as possible. Everybody in this country has something that they probably could benefit from if you went into a study. People don't want to because they say, why would I want to do that? I'll get a placebo or I'll get less than the usual care. That's not allowed. It's just not allowed. The other piece that the DoD asks for is a draft-informed consent. I'd say 80% of people supply them. But they are to allow them to understand what is being told to the patient population, which is sometimes different than what's included in the protocol. Sometimes it's more and sometimes it's less. Not every trial requires a DSMB, a Data Safety Monitoring Board or a plan, but if it has any element of risk, it offers you constraints, it offers you stopping rules, it offers you data analysis that may be valuable and can certainly save you money if the trial should be halted early. Compensation comes up a lot. More and more trials compensate, but you have to make sure it's not too much. When it's given, if it's given in ways that can set a bias. Those are not necessarily statistical issues, but they are clinical trial issues. The transition we discussed, they have to have some way to move it forward. Most people don't go there. They just assume all will be well and I'll get funding. The personnel, by and large, the personnel are well done. The caveat is the biostatistician. It's unusual.
It's so bad.
Yeah,
it's like $300 for 6 years worth of help or something. Like,
and
awful.
And no biosketch. They just figure this is just
TBD graduate student.
Yeah, or whatever. So it's a real failure point, is to not consider your biostatistics support a key team member. A way of gaining money is to actually make the biostatisticians investigators, make them PIs or co-PIs, and then the funding flow will cover salary lines much more efficiently than trying to pay, X dollars from the grant as it's received. Environment, people just say usually it's okay. The budgets vary, but you have to provide it. So at the DoD level, when we get into the peer review, these are the kinds of things that happen there. There's a very, very curated way to respond and address the protocols you're evaluating or the applications you're evaluating. The reviewers are told, instead of offering a dialogue, sort of a flow, which is NIH style, you just kind of chatter, these have to be broken up and parsed into strengths and weaknesses. It's very difficult to teach people to do it, but once they do it, I think everybody kind of likes it. You actually have to clearly declare on a set of metrics whether it's done well or done poorly. And if it's done poorly, is it something that's going to kill the application, or can it be fixed? and if they can offer it, how to fix it. And so specifically in the statistics section, you'll find a lot of the weaknesses that turn up are they didn't do the proper analysis, they didn't look at the type 1 error, they didn't look at the type 2 error, they didn't consider multiplicity, they didn't consider missing data, they didn't declare all these issues. They're not necessarily killers, but when they start to come together, they do. We ask everybody to think everything is a gold standard. We are not tiering these from best to worst. We're saying evaluate each one against a perfect application. Because as I said, we're not looking at a pay line. So it doesn't matter how they come out, from best to worst. That's not necessarily what's going to happen with the funding. So this is where I should have maybe brought this out earlier. This is the reviewer roles. So there's a chair who kind of manages the program. There are the scientific reviewers who are each supposed to bring domain expertise. And it can be very varied because, especially in a clinical trial program, the clinical trials can be all over the world. So you have to bring in a bunch of different people. So then there's a specialist. So it's bioethics, biostats, tech transfer, and the consumers. The SROs are non-voting members, so I didn't put them up there. There are no standing committees, which means that each and every time you have to reach out to people, you have to encourage them, you have to spend reasonable time being passionate and finding people that will buy into why they should do this. There's also varied formats. I don't know how far the NIH has gotten in this. So we have the on-site. There's the teleconferences, which are fairly standard. They're moving to video. It is so awful to do 1 or 2 days, of 5 and 6 hours on the phone. I don't like it. It's much less expensive, but it's really hard. This other option that they do have, which I hope they'll invoke more often, is called a moderated online discussion. So the entire program is done online. All the reviewers turn in their critical evaluation to the SRO. Where there's accord across each of the evaluation metrics, they assume if 2 or 3 people are in general high agreement, good or bad, they'll just give it a pass and they're sent forward. Where there is lack of agreement, they move into an asynchronous email dialogue. And they will have the chair moderate, sometimes the SROs moderate, and they go back and forth and they offer questions to the reviewers that had disagreements. They are not looking for consensus. They're looking for grounded arguments as to where the funding group should hang their hat. Is there a valid reason why whoever said it was stronger or weaker will be able to take precedent in that discussion? And because of the lack of synchrony, people can do their daily job. They can do it during lunch. They can go home at night. People like this, and you get very considered responses. People are not distracted. They take it seriously, and it's actually worked rather well, and it's a significant saving because you're not keeping people on the phone. You're not dragging people to a peer review. Look where we got. So this is basically oriented toward a protocol development. So this is what I keep trying to teach the DoD. The DoD thinks that a biostatistician reads the biostatistical analysis plan, writes a short paragraph about what's strong and what's weak, and moves on. And I said, no, you don't understand. The biostatistician theoretically is involved and invested in every aspect in the development of the protocol, in the development of the way the study is being evolved and then evaluated, and they need to read the whole thing because the whole thing put together should give a very strong picture of engagement of the way it's going to be analyzed to the way it was designed, and they should be really hand in hand, and they don't really get that, but I keep trying. So these are all the different things that a biostatistician should be involved with. And if you work with an investigator, you have to say, listen, you need me for all of this. You don't need me just to do your power analysis. So you gotta teach them. You gotta open their minds. And it goes on. It gets worse. So, and what I was trying to tell the students today is, when you do your budgeting, You have to say, let's say it's a 4-year program, you get, let's say 10%, 10%. You have to up your budget and expectation of involvement for that 3rd and 4th year because you're going to do more work. You're going to be doing monitoring, you're going to be doing data analysis, and you're going to be helping to write the manuscript. It takes time, get compensated. Make sure you ask for more because the expectation is you're going to do more. They may not know it, but you know it. So what does this mean in the long run? It means that there's a lot of T's to cross and I's to dot. I'd say in 90% of the trials I review, they never call out what phase it is. They're so waffling. And when they waffle on the phase, you're waffling on what the outcome metrics are. So if you don't declare this is a phase 2 trial and you haven't given any dosing or toxicity studies, it's not clear you're ready for a phase 2 trial. And some people think they just walk right into a phase 2 trial because they need money or what. I mean, a lot of the pharmaceutical companies, the small ones, come in and they're requesting phase 2 money because they're going to lose their funding because all their investors are getting squeamish and they haven't done sufficient dosing. They're just picking this magic dose and you're like, where the hell did you get that? So you have to define it and it has to be appropriate and you have to have the backup for it. As I said, more endpoints are usually frowned upon. You should try and limit yourself and limit your variables. Very few people in clinical trials make an analysis of what they're going to do if something goes wrong. And in the transition plan, similarly, very few people tell you if this doesn't work out, why it's still valuable to them and where they're going to take the negative data and what they're going to do with that. The DoD stipulates that they want to see everything published. They don't make people publish negative data, and I think they should, because it would save a lot of trouble for a lot of other people. They have not yet gone there. I don't know why. One would think if you're the funding agency, you should be able to. I haven't seen them actually push that too hard. Getting early, it's never too early. It's never too early to be involved. Scrutinize everything. Make sure it's correct. Make sure you believe it. Primary, secondary, a lot of people include exploratory aims. When you start doing all that, you have to consider how many years you've got, whether it's feasible and it's likely to happen, and what its value is. What is the value add of your exploratory ends? So this I thought would be something that might be helpful. This has kind of been sort of pointing to it. I'd say that the most common thing is just lack of attention to detail. I understand that a lot of people submit a lot of proposals and they cut and paste from one to the other. But what that very often means is you're not answering the questions you were asked. You're offering an answer, but that question wasn't asked. And when you read it as a reviewer and you go like, it's interesting. It's not what I wanted to know, but it's interesting. But it takes down your score. So you really have to sit down and it's like writing a book. You have to do sort of chapter by chapter. How am I going to answer these and then flush them each out? And just be really, really careful as you do it. And make sure that you look at all the ways it's going to be reviewed, not just the questions they ask you, but the questions they're going to ask the reviewers. Because we're going to judge you. You want to make sure you understand what we're judging you about. Advancing into the phase 2 or 3 trials happens a lot. The other thing that people do is they do these contingent aims. To do aim 2, you need the data from aim 1. People also do serial trials where they're going to do this trial and take the data and roll to that trial. It's like, guys, first of all, you can't do it in like 2 years. But it happens a lot. Feasibility is challenging at so many levels. Poorly written happens. A lot of the statisticians and also the scientific reviewers say, they don't give legends on a lot of the figures, and they're teeny tiny, which is sort of useless. It looks pretty, but it's useless. So this came up at lunch. What do you do to get funding? How do you improve the potential that you'll get funded? So there are a lot of workshops offered all around the country on proposal writing, grant writing. There's also clinical trial writing. Go to one, go to 2. Try and get old proposals, you know, people that have done them, either good ones or bad ones. One of the students asked me today, how do I do this? You can also look up the clinical trial reports when they actually get published on their successful outcomes, and see the biostatistician that's involved in the study, contact that biostatistician and say, do you have any information that you can help me with? I see you did this trial, I'm interested in this area, I want to become a trialist. Can you send me your paper? Can you send me any information you have about protocols? Work with lots of people, cross a lot of boundaries. The more collaborative you are, the more likely you're going to be drawn in. You can also network with peers here. Do lunches. You know, I don't know if there's a reading group or a paper, you know, whatever group or whatever, but look over what's published, because those are usually documents of people that succeeded. You don't see lots of negative stuff, but you know, work with each other. Speak with people here who have been funded. There are people here who can give you ideas. Some academic institutions require an internal review. It makes the editing better, it makes content better. I don't know if that's something that's done here, but if you have available funding for research, it would be exceedingly helpful for people to have somebody else's eyes, not just their own, before it goes out. If you get invited to participate in a peer review program, they're very helpful, because you become much more clear on all the reasons projects fail. And you'll take that home and you go, oh my God. Professional association meetings also usually run conferences and sub-conferences and clinics, and there's many opportunities to engage with people who do the same thing that you do. Submit proposals. I mean, the worst case scenario is you won't succeed, but if you get good feedback, you'll learn each time you learn. The caveat on submitting proposals is take your time. I mean, it's garbage in, garbage out if you send in rubbish. And I know this one guy, and every time I see his name on an application, I'm like, oh God, oh God, oh God. I don't know why it got here, but it's here. Every time they're awful, and it's just, I don't know. It's just ridiculous. But I feel like I'm educating this human being in how to write clinical trial proposals.